Today I'm going to a party and will stay overnight at a man's place. You can't stop me. Have you ever caught your partner in a lie so shocking? It felt like the floor just dropped out from under you. That's exactly what happened to me. The night I found out my wife was leading a double life, everything changed. I thought I knew her. But the truth was hiding in plain sight. Stay with me. Because by the end of this story, you'll see how betrayal can turn into the most powerful lesson of your life. It was a Friday evening, just like any other. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the worn leather creaking softly under my weight. The soft, familiar hum of the apartment filled the air, along with the faint scent of coffee lingering from earlier that afternoon. As I thumbed through an old paperback I'd meant to finish months ago, I could hear the occasional rustle of clothing coming from the bedroom. Evelyn was getting ready. I didn't need to see her to know she was slipping into that blue dress, the one she had worn on our first date all those years ago. I could picture it perfectly. The way the fabric hugged her figure. The way it shimmered faintly in the light. That dress had always made my heart skip a beat. Tonight, though, it felt different. I don't know what it was exactly, just a gnawing unease I couldn't quite put my finger on. The thought crossed my mind that maybe I should have gone with her to that reunion. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. I mean, I trusted her completely. We'd been through so much together, built a life on a foundation of honesty and love. But still, something felt off. Evelyn stepped out of the bedroom, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. She paused by the mirror in the hallway, adjusting an earring, and giving her reflection a quick smile. "Sure you don't want to come along?" she asked, her voice light and teasing. "It could be fun, you know. A night out might do you good." I smiled back, trying to keep my tone casual. "Nah, you go ahead. Someone's got to keep this place standing while you're off having fun." I meant it as a joke, but even to my own ears, it sounded hollow. Evelyn laughed, a soft, melodic sound that once would have put me at ease. But tonight, it didn't. She looked so excited, so radiant. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something she wasn't saying. Something just out of reach, lurking in the shadows of our conversation. I told myself I was overthinking it. She'd been looking forward to this reunion for weeks. Why ruin it with baseless worries? She grabbed her purse and gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Don't wait up, okay? I might be out late." Her tone was casual, but it hung in the air longer than it should have. I watched her leave, my hand still resting on the arm of the chair. I should have stood up, walked over, and gone with her. But I didn't. Instead, I just watched the door close behind her and listened to the sound of her heels fade down the hallway. I don't know how long I sat there, before the quiet started to feel oppressive. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in. The soft hum of the refrigerator, now more of a low growl. The clocks ticking like a metronome, driving me mad. I glanced at my phone, scrolling through news feeds and checking emails I'd already read. Anything to pass the time. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, that uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. After what felt like an eternity, I stood up and paced the room, rubbing the back of my neck. I even turned on the TV, flipping through channels aimlessly. Nothing held my attention. It was almost like I was waiting for something, some sign. Some reassurance that everything was fine. But there was nothing. Evelyn hadn't posted her usual having a blast updates, no photos with friends, no smiling group selfies. And as the hours dragged on, that lack of any connection started to weigh on me. It wasn't like her. I reminded myself that not everyone was glued to their phones. Maybe she was just caught up in the moment, enjoying herself, laughing and reminiscing with old friends. That's all it was. It had to be. But by the time the clock hit midnight, that reasoning started to wear thin. I couldn't explain why it bothered me so much, why I couldn't just shrug it off and go to bed. It wasn't as if she hadn't stayed out late before. Yet tonight, something about her absence felt different. I looked out the window, watching the occasional car drive by under the yellow glow of the streetlights. The city was quiet, peaceful, even. But that peace felt artificial, like a thin veneer, hiding something I wasn't ready to see. I grabbed my phone again, my thumb hesitating over her contact. Should I text her? Would that make me look insecure? She'd laugh at me, tell me I was being silly, but I could live with that if it meant hearing from her. I typed out a quick message. "Everything okay?" Simple. Direct. I hit send and waited, watching the screen, as if it would give me some kind of answer. But the message just sat there, unread. No response. I put the phone down, my stomach twisting into knots. It wasn't like Evelyn to leave me hanging like that. Not unless something was wrong. I tried to convince myself she'd call me any minute now, laughing off my worries. But as 1 a.m. crept closer, the silence grew unbearable. I found myself back at the window, staring at the empty street, willing her car to appear. The minutes dragged on, each one more agonizing than the last. Every creak in the apartment, every sound outside made my heart jump. I glanced at the door more times than I could count, expecting her to walk in and scold me for being so paranoid. But the door remained closed. The apartment remained silent. My phone stayed dark. And as I sat there, alone in the stillness, that gnawing feeling in my gut grew stronger. I didn't want to admit it, even to myself. But I knew deep down, I wasn't overthinking this. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what it was yet. By the time it hit midnight, I was starting to feel like I was losing my grip. Evelyn still hadn't posted a single picture. Not a miss these guys. Selfie. Not a reunion vibes caption. Not even one of those quick shots of her drink in hand. It wasn't like her. She was always the first one to flood social media with updates, especially when she was out with friends. But tonight, my screen stayed dark. I knew I could just pick up my phone and call her, hear her voice, put all these creeping doubts to rest. But I couldn't do it. Something about that quiet about her silence was making my chest tighten. I tried to brush it off. She was probably caught up in the moment, laughing with old friends, losing track of time. That's what I kept telling myself as I sat there on the couch, my legs bouncing with restless energy. I flicked through channels, turned the TV off, turned it back on again, anything to stop my thoughts from spiraling. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake this feeling. It was as if some part of me, buried deep down, already knew that tonight wasn't like the other times she'd stayed out late. Around 1, I finally grabbed my phone and shot her a text. Just something simple, everything okay. So I didn't sound like I was panicking. The message sent, and then, nothing. No gray bubble showing she'd read it. No typing indicator. I stared at the screen for a long time, before tossing the phone onto the coffee table. The sound sharper in the stillness than I expected. She was fine. I told myself that over and over. But if she was fine, why hadn't she answered? Minutes turned into hours, and by 2, I was pacing the living room, glancing at the clock, checking my phone, looking out the window, repeating the cycle all over again. Each time I checked, I hoped to see her name pop up. Just a quick "I'm good" or "It's been a crazy night, I'll be home soon." Something. Anything. But my phone stayed silent. I kept catching myself imagining the worst scenarios that made my stomach churn. Was she in trouble? Was her phone dead? I ran through every possible excuse, every reason she might not be responding. I tried to make it make sense, to calm the rising tide of panic inside me. But each explanation felt thinner than the last. By the time the clock hit 3:30, my nerves were shot. I was sitting on the edge of the couch, elbows on my knees, staring at the door like it might magically open on its own. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. And then I heard the faint sound of a key turning in the lock. I shot up so fast. I nearly tripped over the coffee table. The door creaked open, and there she was. Evelyn. Her hair was a little messy, her lipstick slightly smudged, and she walked in like it was any other night. "You're still up?" she asked casually, slipping off her shoes. She didn't even look at me as she crossed the room, her voice too light, too nonchalant. It was a long night. I'm exhausted. I stared at her, my mind racing, trying to read her body language. Something wasn't right. She wasn't just tired, she was avoiding me. The way she brushed past me, the way her shoulders tensed when I asked, "How was the reunion?" told me everything I needed to know. Her answer was vague, offhanded. "It was fun, I guess. Good to see everyone again." She didn't elaborate, didn't offer any of the usual anecdotes she always shared after a night out. She just disappeared into the bedroom, leaving me standing there in the middle of the living room, my stomach knotting up tighter than ever. I sat back down on the couch, staring at the spot where she'd just been. My phone buzzed, and for a second, I thought it was some delayed response to my earlier text. But it was just a notification from a news app. Nothing important, I set the phone down again, running a hand through my hair, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Evelyn's behavior wasn't normal. She was never this quiet after seeing her friends. Normally, she'd be full of stories who said what, who looked different, who hadn't changed at all. But tonight, all I got was a fun, I guess. It wasn't just the words though, it was her tone, her body language. The way she couldn't meet my eyes. The way she disappeared into the bedroom so quickly. It was like she didn't want me to look at her too long. Like she didn't want me to see something she was hiding. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was being paranoid, reading into things that weren't there. But I couldn't help it. I'd known Evelyn for years. I knew her habits, her tells. And everything about her tonight felt wrong. It was subtle small details that probably wouldn't mean anything to someone else. But to me, they were blaring alarms. I wanted to believe she was just tired, that she'd had one too many glasses of wine and was feeling off. But my gut wouldn't let me rest. I sat there in the dark, the house so quiet I could hear the refrigerator's low hum, the distant whoosh of cars on the main road. The unease was suffocating. It crept into every corner of my mind, refusing to let go. Eventually, I forced myself to stand up and head to bed. Evelyn was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. She was lying on her side, facing away from me, her breathing slow and steady. I watched her for a moment, my mind racing with questions I didn't have the courage to ask. I climbed into bed beside her, but sleep didn't come. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the occasional creak of the apartment, feeling the weight of the silence between us. I knew something had changed tonight. I just didn't know what. And that not knowing was the worst part of all. So here's the burning question. When I saw that message on her phone, when I saw Nathan's name, what should I have done next? Should I have confronted her immediately? Or should I have gathered more evidence first? What do you think? Comment 1 if you think I should have confronted her right then and there. Comment 2 if I should have waited for more proof. I'll give you a few seconds to decide. Your opinion matters. When I saw that message pop up on her phone, my stomach dropped. The name Nathan glowed on the screen, and below it, the words, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at it, willing it to disappear, willing it to mean something innocent, something explainable. But no matter how much I tried to twist it in my mind, the words were clear. Too clear. The phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up once more, and I reached for it instinctively. My hands were shaking so much I nearly dropped it. I didn't open the messages. I couldn't. Just seeing them, seeing his name, was enough to make my heart pound against my ribs like a sledgehammer. I set the phone down on the counter and stepped back, as if distance could somehow make it less real. Evelyn was still in the shower, the sound of water running muffling the chaos inside my head. I wanted to burst in there and demand answers, but I couldn't. Not yet. I needed time to process what I'd just seen, time to figure out how to even begin this conversation. My mind raced with questions. Who the hell was Nathan? How long had this been going on? Had it really just started last night, or had she been lying to me for weeks, months even? The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. Her distant behavior, the late nights out, the way she brushed me off whenever I asked how things were going. It all pointed to something I hadn't wanted to see. But now, there it was, undeniable. My wife, the woman I had built my life with, the woman I trusted more than anyone, was hiding something. And that something was Nathan. I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the kitchen. My thoughts were like a storm, crashing and swirling, refusing to settle. I felt stupid, blindsided. How could I have missed this? Was I really that oblivious? I thought we were solid. I thought we had a bond that couldn't be broken. But as I replayed the past few weeks in my head, I saw all the signs I had ignored. The sudden work meetings that ran late. The vague explanations when she'd come home smelling like a different perfume. The way she'd glance at her phone and then quickly set it down, like she didn't want me to see who was texting her. I'd brushed it all off, told myself I was overthinking. But now I knew I hadn't been overthinking at all. I'd been fooling myself. The water shut off, and I froze. My mind screamed at me to confront her right then and there, to ask who Nathan was, and why he thought last night was amazing. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead. I didn't know what to say, how to even start. part of me wanted to keep quiet, to give her the chance to come clean on her own. But another part of me, an angry, wounded part, wanted to shove the phone in her face and demand she explain every single detail. I could hear her moving around in the bathroom, humming softly. How could she act so normal when I was standing here, falling apart? She came out a minute later, her hair wrapped in a towel, her face fresh and makeup free. She gave me a quick smile, a casual "Hey, babe," as she moved toward the bedroom. I stood there, clutching the counter, watching her like she was a stranger in my own home. She didn't notice. She didn't notice the tension in my posture, the way my hands were gripping the edge of the countertop so hard my knuckles were white. She just went about her business, as if everything was fine. I wanted to scream at her, to stop her in her tracks and force her to tell me the truth. But I didn't. I let her walk away, let her leave me standing there with 1,000 unanswered questions, and a phone screen that felt like it was burning a hole in my vision. I grabbed my coffee cup, took a sip, and nearly choked on it. My mouth was dry, my throat tight. Nothing felt normal anymore. The whole world had shifted, and I was left alone in the aftermath. I sat down at the kitchen table, my head in my hands. I needed a plan. I couldn't just blindly confront her without knowing more. If I blew up now, I'd lose any chance of finding out the truth. And I needed the truth. I needed to know who this Nathan guy was, how long this had been going on, and why she had chosen to keep it from me. But more than that, I needed to understand why I hadn't seen it coming. Was there something I could have done to prevent this? Was there something I'd missed, some moment where I could have stepped in and changed the course of whatever had led us here? My phone buzzed on the table, pulling me out of my thoughts. It wasn't Evelyn's this time, it was mine. I picked it up, half hoping it was her, some message that would magically make everything okay. But it wasn't. It was a work email, something trivial. I deleted it without reading and set the phone back down. I couldn't focus on anything else right now. All I could think about was her. The way she'd smiled at me this morning as if nothing was wrong. The way she'd laughed off my concerns last night when I asked why she hadn't posted anything from the reunion. She'd made me feel like I was the one overreacting. But I wasn't overreacting. I had seen the message. I had seen his name. I didn't know how long I sat there, staring at nothing. The kitchen was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock, each second dragging on like an eternity. I could hear Evelyn moving around in the other room, humming to herself as she got ready for the day. It felt surreal. How could she be so calm? Did she know I'd seen the message? Was she waiting for me to say something? Or was she so confident in her ability to hide the truth that she didn't even think twice about it? I stood up, pacing again. The kitchen felt too small, the air too heavy. I opened the window, letting the cool morning breeze wash over me. But even that didn't help. I felt trapped, cornered by a reality I wasn't ready to face. I didn't know how to move forward from here. Should I confront her now, while the message was still fresh in my mind? Or should I wait, gather more information, figure out exactly what was going on before making my move? Each option felt wrong in its own way. I didn't want to start a fight, but I also didn't want to sit here pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was a text from a friend asking if I wanted to grab a beer later. I stared at it for a long moment before typing a quick, "Sure, sounds good." Maybe getting out of the house, even for a little while, would help me clear my head. Maybe talking to someone who wasn't Evelyn, would give me some perspective. But deep down, I knew that no amount of beer or friendly conversation was going to make this go away. The message from Nathan was burned into my memory, and until I got answers, it was going to keep eating away at me. As I headed back toward the living room, I caught a glimpse of Evelyn standing by the bedroom window, her phone in hand. She wasn't smiling, wasn't humming. She looked tense, focused. I couldn't see what was on her screen, but the way she held the phone, the way her thumb hovered over it like she was debating what to do next, sent a chill down my spine. She glanced over her shoulder, saw me watching, and quickly set the phone down on the nightstand. "What's up?" she asked, her voice too casual. "Nothing," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just checking if you needed anything before I head out." "No, I'm good," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You're heading out?" "Yeah," I said, "meeting up with a friend. Just for a bit." "Okay," she said, turning back to the window. "Have fun." I nodded and walked out of the room, my chest tight, my mind racing. I had to figure this out. I had to get to the bottom of it. But for now, all I could do was wait, watch, and try to keep my head above water. That name Nathan kept flashing through my mind, gnawing at me like a splinter I couldn't reach. After that first message, I started noticing more things. Little things. Her phone, usually left lying around carelessly, was now tucked into her pocket or placed face down on the table. When she got a call, she'd walk into another room, her voice dropping just enough that I couldn't make out what she was saying. I tried not to jump to conclusions. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe she just needed some privacy for work or family stuff. But the pattern was unmistakable. Every time I'd casually ask who she was talking to, she'd brush it off, just a friend, she'd say. Her tone a little too light, a little too practiced. And every time, it only made my stomach knot tighter. The evidence was piling up, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold it all in. One night, after she went to bed early claiming she was exhausted from work, I sat in the living room staring at my laptop. I don't know what I was hoping to find, maybe a little reassurance that I was just being paranoid, that there was a logical explanation for the shift in her behavior. But instead, I found more reasons to doubt her. Our shared phone account showed calls to the same number over and over again. Not just one or two, but dozens. Each call sent a jolt of anger and confusion through me. The same number would show up late at night, early in the morning, even on weekends when I thought she was just out running errands. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the logs, the timestamps glaring back at me like accusations. And the texts, there were so many. I couldn't see what they said, but the sheer volume was enough to make my blood boil. This wasn't just a casual conversation with an old friend. It was more than that. It had to be. I tried to keep my emotions in check. I told myself I needed more proof before I confronted her. Jumping the gun would only give her an excuse to deny everything, to turn it back on me, to make me feel like the crazy one. But every new detail I found was like a weight pressing down on my chest. I could barely focus at work, my mind constantly spinning with possibilities. I'd come home, and even when she greeted me with a smile or tried to make small talk, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all a cover. Her laugh sounded hollow. Her hugs felt distant. She wasn't the same person anymore, or maybe she was, and I'd just been blind to who she really was. Either way, the woman I thought I knew was slipping away, and in her place was someone I couldn't recognize. It wasn't long before I started watching her more closely. Not in an obvious way, but enough to pick up on the little things. The way she'd glance at her phone and smile, then quickly put it away. The way she'd leave the room for longer than usual when she got a text or a call. The way her excuses for being late seemed just a little too rehearsed. It all added up to a picture I didn't want to see. A picture of my wife and another man. I felt like I was losing my mind. I'd always trusted her completely, never even considered that she might betray me. But now that trust was crumbling, piece by piece. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop it. One evening, after she'd said she was meeting a friend for coffee, I decided to check the location sharing feature on our phones. It wasn't something I normally did, I'd never felt the need to. But that night, I needed some kind of answer. Some reassurance that I wasn't just imagining things. I told myself it was harmless, that I just wanted to know she was safe. When I saw her location pop up on the map, my heart sank. She wasn't at the coffee shop she said she'd be at. She was at a small restaurant on the other side of town, one I didn't recognize. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands clenched into fists. I wanted to grab my keys and drive over there, to see for myself what was going on. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I watched the little dot on the map, waiting for it to move, waiting for her to leave. When she finally did, I put my phone down and tried to breathe. It didn't help. My chest felt like it was going to explode. The next day, I found myself checking the logs again. I didn't want to, but I couldn't help it. I needed to know if that number was still showing up. And of course, it was. More texts, more calls. I felt like I was drowning, like I couldn't keep my head above water. The anger inside me was building, bubbling just below the surface. Every time I looked at her, every time she smiled at me like everything was fine, I wanted to shout at her, to demand she'd tell me the truth. But I held back. I didn't have the full picture yet. and I couldn't risk confronting her until I knew everything. I didn't just need proof, I needed undeniable evidence. I needed something that would leave no room for her to lie, no room for her to wiggle out of it. And until I had that, I had to keep playing the part of the oblivious husband. As the days went on, the distance between us grew. She didn't notice it, or maybe she did, and just didn't care. She was so caught up in whatever was going on with Nathan, that she didn't see how much this was tearing me apart. Or maybe she did see, and that made it easier for her to stay away. Either way, our conversations became shorter, our time together more strained. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do anything that might tip her off that I knew. I needed her to think I was still clueless, still trusting, so I could get to the bottom of this without her shutting me out completely. It was a miserable way to live, constantly second-guessing every word, every action. But I didn't have a choice. I had to find out the truth, and once I did, I'd figure out what came next. Whether that meant confronting her, leaving her, or something else, I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't keep going like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it so clearly wasn't. I needed to know. I needed the truth. The more I watched her, the more I saw things I didn't want to see. Her usual habits, the little routines I'd come to know so well, had changed. Evelyn was always someone who loved her mornings early, coffee in hand, humming along to a playlist of old classics. But now, she'd be out of bed before me, her phone clutched tightly in her hand as she slipped off to the other room. I'd hear her voice, hushed and low, and when I asked who she was talking to, she'd wave me off with a vague, "Just catching up with someone from work." But it never sounded like work. It never sounded like the kind of easy conversations she used to have. There was an edge in her tone, something softer, more intimate, and I couldn't ignore it. I started paying closer attention. When she got home from a so-called lunch meeting, I'd noticed the way she avoided eye contact, how she'd set her purse down on the counter and immediately head to the bathroom. I'd hear the faucet run for a long time, as if she needed that extra moment to compose herself. I'd notice how she'd glance at her phone more frequently, the way her face would light up with a brief smile, then quickly shift to a neutral expression when she saw me watching. Every time I caught her like that, my stomach would twist into knots. I wanted to ask her right then and there, "Who are you texting? Why are you smiling like that?" But I didn't. I bit my tongue, hoping I was just reading too much into it, hoping I was wrong, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. One night, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she went to take a shower. I stood there staring at it, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself I wasn't going to look. I didn't want to stoop that low. I didn't want to be that guy who checked his wife's phone behind her back. But the nagging voice in my head wouldn't let it go. What if there was something there? Something that could finally confirm what I'd been dreading. My hand hovered over the phone for what felt like an eternity before I finally picked it up. The screen lit up, showing a text from Nathan. Just seeing his name again made my blood run cold. I didn't open it, didn't dare read the conversation, but the preview alone was enough to make my chest tighten. "Can't wait to see you again soon," it said. My grip on the phone tightened as my jaw clenched. I set it back down and walked away, the anger and confusion bubbling up so fiercely I thought I might scream. When she came out of the bathroom, her hair still damp, she looked at me with that familiar smile. "What's for dinner?" she asked, like nothing was wrong. I forced a smile, hoping she couldn't see through it, hoping she couldn't hear the crack in my voice when I said, "Whatever you feel like." The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. I couldn't keep this up much longer. The weight of it all, the suspicion, the lies, was too much. But I knew I had to wait. I had to get more information, more proof. Without it, she could just deny everything, make me feel like I was the one losing my mind. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in our home became unbearable. I'd catch her sneaking out for quick errands that lasted hours. When she came back, she'd barely say a word, as if she were trying not to draw attention to herself. I'd find myself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, running through every interaction we'd had that day, searching for clues. Every time I thought about confronting her, I felt paralyzed. What if I was wrong? What if I accused her of something she wasn't doing? But then I'd remember that message from Nathan, and all those doubts would vanish. I wasn't wrong. I knew in my gut that something was happening. I just didn't know how to face it. I started keeping a mental log of her movements. When she said she had to stay late at the office, I'd check the time she left and the time she came home. When she claimed she was meeting a friend for lunch, I'd make a note of how long she was gone and how she acted when she returned. It felt horrible, like I was some kind of investigator in my own marriage. But I couldn't stop myself. I needed answers. I needed to know how deep this went, how long it had been going on, and what it meant for us. Each day that passed without me confronting her felt like a victory for her lies. But I wasn't ready yet. I wasn't ready to blow it all up without having every single piece of the puzzle in my hands. One evening, she said she had to run out to pick up something from the store. She grabbed her keys, gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and said she'd be back in an hour. I watched her go, then grabbed my phone and checked the location sharing feature again. I told myself I wasn't going to follow her, that I was just curious, just checking to make sure she really was where she said she'd be. But when I saw her location pop up at a park on the other side of town, I couldn't sit still. I grabbed my coat, jumped in my car, and drove there. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, my mind racing. What would I find? What would I say if I saw her with him? When I pulled into the parking lot, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I spotted her car immediately, parked at the far end near the trailhead. I didn't see anyone with her, but the sight of her car in a place she had no reason to be sent a wave of anger and dread through me. I parked a few spots away and sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to decide what to do. Should I confront her now? Should I wait and see who she met? My breath came in short, shallow bursts as I fought to keep myself calm. I hadn't expected to feel this much rage, this much betrayal. I'd hoped that maybe I was wrong, that maybe there was a perfectly good reason for her being here. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. She was here for him. I didn't have to see it to know. And that realization hit me like a freight train. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at her car, willing myself to move. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I turned the key in the ignition, backed out of the parking space, and drove home. My head was spinning, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't know what my next step was, but one thing was clear: I couldn't keep pretending. I had to confront her. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. By the time she came home that night, the tension was like a wire pulled tight, ready to snap. She walked through the door with a casual "Hey" on, setting her bag down on the counter and reaching for a glass of water. I watched her, my heart pounding so hard I thought she might hear it. Her movements were too smooth, too practiced. She didn't meet my eyes, just like every other night lately. I stood there, leaning against the doorway to the kitchen, my arms crossed, trying to keep my voice even. "How was the store?" I asked, the words coming out slower than I meant. She didn't look up. "Fine," she said, taking a long sip from her glass. Nothing exciting, but something in her tone gave her away. It was too light, too rehearsed, and it felt like a slap in the face. I wanted to call her out right then and there. I wanted to ask her why she wasn't where she said she'd be. I wanted to demand she explain what the hell was going on. But the words caught in my throat. If I pressed too hard now, she might shut down completely. She might have another excuse ready, another lie lined up. Instead, I stepped closer, watching her carefully. "You've been working late a lot these days," I said, keeping my voice calm but not casual. Her shoulders stiffened just slightly, but she didn't turn around. "Yeah," she said, setting the glass down. "It's been really busy lately." She tried to walk past me, but I didn't move. "You sure that's all it is?" I asked, my voice a little firmer. Finally, she looked at me. Her smile was thin, forced. "What else would it be?" she asked. Her tone light but with an edge of defensiveness. I held her gaze, waiting for her to falter, to break. But she didn't. She just stood there, smiling faintly, like nothing was wrong. Like I hadn't just caught her lying to my face. She walked past me, heading to the bedroom, leaving me standing in the kitchen, fists clenched at my sides. My mind was racing. The way she'd tensed up, the way her tone had shifted, it was all the confirmation I needed. She wasn't just busy at work. She wasn't just running errands. There was someone else, and no matter how hard she tried to hide it, the truth was slipping through the cracks. I sat down at the table, staring at the spot where her bag was sitting. I wanted to grab it, dump it out, look for more evidence. But I stopped myself. I couldn't do it like that. If I confronted her now without proof, she'd twist it around, make me look like the crazy one. I needed something concrete, something she couldn't deny. But the longer this went on, the more the anger built inside me. I couldn't keep waiting forever. I needed answers, and I needed them soon. The next morning, she was up before me again, already dressed, her makeup carefully done. "I have an early meeting," she said, brushing past me on her way to the door. I nodded, barely looking at her. She kissed me on the cheek, just a quick peck, and then she was gone. I stared at the door after it closed, my stomach churning. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Something had to give. I picked up my phone, scrolling through the call logs again. Her late night calls, her frequent texts to the same number, it was all there. I stared at the screen, the anger bubbling up again. This wasn't just in my head. This wasn't paranoia. This was real, and she was lying to me every single day. I decided I couldn't wait any longer. That afternoon, when I knew she'd be at work, I took a closer look at her laptop. We didn't keep passwords from each other, not until recently, at least. But hers was still saved on the home Wi-Fi. And when I opened it, I found her email logged in. My heart raced as I clicked through her inbox, searching for anything that would confirm what I already knew. And then I found it. Emails from Nathan. They weren't overly affectionate, at least not the ones I saw. But there was no mistaking the tone. "Looking forward to seeing you tonight" was one of the subject lines. Another said, "Let's meet at the usual spot." My hands trembled as I closed the laptop, my chest heaving. I felt like I was going to be sick. There it was, everything I needed to confirm that my wife was seeing another man. My worst fears weren't just fears anymore. They were reality. I tried to calm myself down, to think rationally. But the more I thought about it, the more the anger and betrayal took over. I paced the living room, gripping my phone tightly. I wanted to call her, to scream at her, to tell her I knew everything. But I stopped myself. I knew I needed a plan. If I confronted her without thinking it through, she'd deny it. She'd tell me I was imagining things, that I was making it up. And if she thought I had no proof, she'd keep lying. I couldn't let that happen. I needed to gather everything. The texts, the call logs, the emails. I needed to put it all together so that when I confronted her, she couldn't wiggle out of it. No more excuses, no more lies. She'd have to face the truth, and I'd finally get the answers I deserved. That evening, I tried to act normal. When she came home, I smiled, asked her how her day was, even cooked dinner. She seemed more relaxed, probably thinking I hadn't noticed anything. But inside, I was boiling over. Every time she smiled at me, every time she laughed, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. How could she stand there, looking me in the eye, and act like everything was fine? How could she lie to me so easily? I felt like a stranger in my own home, like my life had been turned upside down. I wanted to yell, to demand answers, to force her to admit what she'd done. But I bit my tongue. Not yet. I had to hold it together a little longer. After dinner, she went to bed early again, saying she was tired. I sat in the living room, staring at her phone on the coffee table. I knew I'd find more if I looked. But I didn't need to see any more messages. I already had enough. I turned off the TV, leaned back in the chair, and stared at the ceiling. My chest felt heavy, my head was pounding. I'd thought I'd have more time to figure out what to do. But now I knew I had no choice. The lies, the betrayal, it was all too much. I had to confront her. I couldn't keep pretending. But first, I needed to make sure she couldn't deny it. I needed to make sure I was ready. This wasn't just a conversation. This was the moment that would change everything. When Evelyn walked through the door that night, I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears. It wasn't just the usual unease I'd been carrying around for weeks. This time, it was raw anticipation. I sat in the kitchen, the laptop open in front of me, though I hadn't actually been reading anything for at least an hour. She barely glanced at me as she set her bag down on the counter and kicked off her shoes. "Long day," she murmured, brushing past me. I clenched my jaw, my mind racing through everything I'd seen, everything I knew. This was it. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I couldn't keep carrying this weight, this anger that felt like it was going to tear me apart. I turned in my seat as she reached the hallway. Evelyn, I called after her, my voice steady but low. She stopped, her hand halfway to the light switch, and turned to look at me. Yeah? She asked, her tone casual. Too casual. That fake, breezy voice she'd been using lately, the one that made my skin crawl. I stood, letting the chair scrape against the floor as I pushed it back. We need to talk. My words hung in the air between us, heavy and deliberate. She blinked, her brows knitting together, and I saw the first flicker of tension cross her face. Now? She asked. I nodded, my jaw tightening. Now? She hesitated, just for a second, and then moved back into the kitchen. I could see the guarded look in her eyes as she leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. What's this about? She said, her voice carefully neutral. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stepped closer, bracing my hands on the edge of the counter. I could feel my chest rising and falling, each breath heavier than the last. The words were right there, on the tip of my tongue, but I wanted to be sure. I wanted to see her reaction, her face, when I said it out loud. Who's Nathan? I asked, my voice calm but cold. Her head jerked up, her eyes widening for a fraction of a second, before she caught herself. What? She said, her voice higher now, defensive. I held her gaze, not letting her look away. Nathan. Who is he? I repeated. Her mouth opened, then closed, and she shifted her weight, her arms tightening around her chest. He's just a friend, she said quickly. Someone from work. Her voice was too quick, too rehearsed, and I could feel the anger building in my chest, like a volcano about to erupt. Just a friend, I echoed, my voice hardening. A friend you're texting late at night? A friend you're meeting in parks and restaurants? A friend who says he can't wait to see you again? Her face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks as her lips pressed into a thin line. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. I straightened, crossing my arms as I stared her down. Don't lie to me, Evelyn, I said, my voice rising slightly. I've seen the messages. I've seen the call logs. I know where you've been. She shook her head, her eyes wide now, but she still tried to deny it. You've been looking at my phone? At my calls? She stopped, swallowing hard. That's not okay, Marcus. You can't just. I slammed my hand down on the counter, the sound echoing through the kitchen. Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. I shouted, the words spilling out before I could stop them. You're the one who's been lying. You're the one sneaking around behind my back. How long has this been going on? How long, Evelyn? Her mouth opened and closed again, like she couldn't decide what to say. For the first time, she looked afraid. Not of me, but of what was happening, of what she couldn't stop. It's not what you think, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Then tell me, I said, my voice sharp and cutting. Tell me what it is, because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like you're having an affair. Her face crumpled, and she covered her mouth with her hand. She didn't deny it. She didn't say anything. And in that moment, the last shred of hope I'd been clinging to disappeared. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Like the air had been sucked out of the room. She started to cry. Silent tears streaming down her face, and I couldn't stand to look at her. I turned away, gripping the back of the chair so hard my knuckles turned white. How could you? I said, my voice breaking. How could you do this to us? Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't bring myself to comfort her. I'd always been the one to reach out first, to try and fix things, but not this time. Not after this. She tried to speak, her words coming out in broken gasps. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said. It just happened. I was lonely, Marcus. You've been so distant, and I cut her off, my voice raw. Don't you dare blame this on me. Don't try to justify what you've done. You made a choice, Evelyn. You chose him over me. She wiped at her face, her hands trembling. I never meant to hurt you, she said. I love you, Marcus. I still love you. I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh and humorless. You love me, I said, turning back to her. Is that what you call this? Sneaking around with another man, lying to my face, breaking every promise we made? That's not love, Evelyn. That's betrayal. She flinched at my words, her tears falling faster now. Please, she said, reaching for me, Please don't give up on us. I'll end it. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't leave me. I stepped back, out of her reach. My chest felt like it was going to explode. My head pounding with everything I wanted to say but couldn't. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, my voice low, almost a whisper. I don't know if I even want to. Her sobs filled the silence, but I couldn't listen anymore. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there. I made it to the living room before my legs gave out, and I sank into the couch, my head in my hands. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, it all came crashing down at once. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to move forward. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. Her sobs faded as I left the room, but the silence that followed wasn't any better. I stood in the hallway, staring at the family photos we'd hung there years ago. The ones we'd chosen together. The ones that, at the time, made us both smile. Now, they just felt like taunts, frozen memories of a life I thought I understood. I could still hear her faint movements in the kitchen. The sound of a chair scraping the floor. Her trying to pull herself together. Part of me wanted to turn around. To go back and talk. Not to fix things, but to get it all out in the open. I needed to know why. I needed her to explain how the woman I'd trusted so completely could become the stranger I barely recognized. I forced myself to move, heading into the living room, and sinking into the old armchair by the window. The night outside was pitch black, the street lamp casting long, uneven shadows through the blinds. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost midnight. But I knew sleep wouldn't come anytime soon. Not after what had just happened. My mind was racing, every word she'd said replaying in a loop. I was lonely. You've been so distant. I love you. Those phrases were like splinters stuck under my skin, impossible to ignore. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But how could I, after everything I'd seen, after the lies I'd uncovered? I rubbed my temples, trying to think. What now? What was I supposed to do? She'd cried. She'd apologized. She'd said she still loved me. But was it real? Or was it just another attempt to cover up the mess she'd made? I thought back to the messages from Nathan, the meetings, the late-night calls. No matter how much I wanted to believe in her regret, the evidence told a different story. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern, something she'd chosen to do again and again. That was the part I couldn't wrap my head around. She'd looked me in the eye, over and over, and lied. Not just once, but countless times. I glanced toward the hallway. It was quiet now. I wondered what she was thinking. If she was still sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the floor, or if she'd gone to bed. Either way, I couldn't face her again. Not yet. My anger wasn't sharp anymore. It was heavy, like a weight pressing on my chest. It was still there, but now it felt like exhaustion, like I'd been fighting a battle I couldn't win. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room. I was tired of doubting, tired of wondering, tired of waiting for the other shoe to drop. But most of all, I was tired of pretending that we could just go back to the way things were. The thought crossed my mind, what if I just walked out? What if I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and left? Drove away without saying another word. The idea was tempting, but it didn't feel right. Not yet, at least. I'd spent years building this life with her, and as much as I hated what she'd done, I wasn't ready to throw it all away in a single night. Maybe that made me weak, or naive, or just too hopeful. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I could walk away without at least trying to understand. Without knowing the whole story. I sat there for what felt like hours, the room growing colder as the night went on. Every now and then, I'd hear a soft creak from the kitchen, like she was shifting in her chair. Or maybe pacing the floor. I wondered if she was waiting for me to come back. If she was hoping I'd walk in and tell her it was okay, that we'd work through it. But I couldn't do that. Not now, maybe not ever. Trust wasn't something you could just patch up with an apology. Once it was broken, it took everything to rebuild it. And even then, it was never the same. It always carried the scars. The cracks that reminded you of what happened. I didn't know if I was willing to spend years trying to fix something that might never truly heal. Eventually, I heard her footsteps heading down the hallway. I didn't look up, but I knew she was going to the bedroom. The door creaked shut behind her, and the silence settled in again. I stayed in the chair, staring out the window, watching as the streetlight flickered. My hands rested on the armrests, my fingers gripping the worn fabric. I thought about all the times I'd sat in that chair before reading, watching TV, holding a cup of coffee on a lazy Sunday morning. Back then, I never would have imagined sitting here like this, feeling like my entire life had been turned upside down. A car drove by outside, its headlights briefly illuminating the room. For a moment, I thought about calling a friend, someone who could tell me what to do, who could give me some kind of guidance. But who could I call? Who would understand what I was feeling right now? Even if someone answered, what could they possibly say that would make any of this easier? No, this was something I had to figure out on my own. It wasn't just about her. It was about me, what I could live with, what I could forgive, what I couldn't. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, my hands running through my hair. The clock ticked on, and I could feel the night stretching out before me, endless and empty. I didn't know what the morning would bring, but I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same. Not between us, not within me. I had seen too much, felt too much, to ever go back to the way things were. And as much as that thought scared me, it also brought a strange sense of clarity. I was standing on the edge of something new, something uncertain. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to step forward or just stay right there, frozen in the moment. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the blinds, I found myself still sitting in that same chair. My back ached, my eyes burned, and my mind was a tangle of frayed thoughts. The house was utterly silent now. No more faint creaks from the kitchen, no more shuffling footsteps. It felt like the calm after a storm, though I couldn't say if the storm had actually passed or if I was just in the eye of it, waiting for the next onslaught. Evelyn was still in the bedroom sleeping, maybe, or just lying there like I was, unable to find peace in the middle of all this turmoil. Either way, I wasn't about to go in and find out. I didn't have the energy, the will. Not yet. What I did have, finally, was clarity. I didn't know what the rest of my life looked like, but I knew that whatever it was, it couldn't include the constant suspicion and the endless questioning. If I stayed here, if I tried to move forward with Evelyn, every moment would be haunted by what I'd seen, what I'd uncovered. There would always be that lingering doubt, that little voice in the back of my mind whispering, what if she's lying again? And that wasn't a life I could live, not for me, not for her. If there was any hope for either of us to find something better, something real, it would have to start with the truth. The raw, unvarnished truth. When she finally emerged from the bedroom, she was wearing the same clothes she'd gone to bed in, her hair a little messy, her face pale. She hesitated when she saw me, her hand brushing against the doorframe as though she needed the support. You didn't sleep, she said softly, more observation than question. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak just yet. She moved into the kitchen, opened a cabinet, and poured herself a glass of water. The sound of the faucet, the faint clink of glass on counter, these everyday noises felt surreal. Like they didn't belong in the same house where so much had just unraveled. She took a sip, then turned to face me, leaning back against the counter. Her arms were crossed over her chest, not in defiance, but in that small, self-protective way she always did when she was nervous. Marcus, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I meant what I said last night. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't mean for things to happen the way they did. She trailed off, searching my face for some sign of understanding, some glimmer of hope that we could work this out. But I didn't give her one. I couldn't. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Evelyn, I said, my voice quieter than I expected. I've been thinking about everything. About us. About what's happened. I paused, trying to find the right words. And I can't do this anymore. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head, her voice trembling. Marcus, please. Let me finish, I interrupted, more firmly. I've been holding on to what we used to have, trying to convince myself that if I just ignored everything, if I just waited long enough, it would go away. But it hasn't. And it won't. I've seen too much. I know too much, and I can't pretend anymore. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. I could see her trying to process what I was saying, trying to find some argument, some way to change my mind, but there wasn't one. I knew what I needed to do, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt a strange sense of calm, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. "I'm leaving," I said, the words sounding more final than I'd expected. "I don't know where I'm going yet, but I can't stay here. Not like this. I need time. I need space. And maybe you do too." Her hands gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. "We can fix this," she whispered. "We can go to counseling, talk to someone. We can start over. I know we can." But I shook my head. Starting over doesn't mean anything if we can't trust each other. And right now, I don't. I don't trust you, Evelyn. And that's not something I can just flip a switch on. Her tears fell silently, streaking her face, and for a moment, I almost reached out to comfort her. Almost. But I stopped myself. Comforting her now would only make things harder for her. For me. I had to be firm. I had to see this through. I rose from the chair, feeling the ache in my legs and back from sitting for so long. "I'll pack some things and go," I said, not meeting her eyes. "We can talk about everything else later, what to do with the house, the rest of our stuff. But for now, I just need to go." She didn't stop me. She just stood there, her face crumpling, her shoulders shaking as she cried. I turned away and headed down the hall to the bedroom. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started throwing clothes into it, not caring much what I grabbed. A few shirts, some jeans, socks, underwear, my toothbrush, my shaving kit. It all felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. But it was mine. It was happening. And I knew it was the only choice I had left. When I walked back down the hallway with my bag, Evelyn was still in the kitchen. She looked up at me, her red, tear-streaked face full of sorrow, but she didn't say a word. I paused at the door, my hand on the knob. "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. Not just for her, but for both of us. For what we'd lost. For what I couldn't save. Then I opened the door and stepped outside. The air was cool and fresh, the morning sun just starting to warm the pavement. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, trying to steady myself. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what came next. But I knew I couldn't stay in that house, in that life, any longer. I needed to start over. To find myself again. And as I walked to my car, bag slung over my shoulder, I felt a strange mixture of pain and relief. The pain of letting go, and the relief of finally doing it. When I drove away, I didn't look back. I just kept my eyes on the road ahead, the city slowly waking up around me. I didn't know where I was going, or how long it would take me to get there. All I knew was that I had to keep moving forward, 1 mile, 1 day at a time. And that's how it all played out, every painful truth, every hard decision. But here's what I want to ask you. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have stayed? Or would you have walked away for good? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, the most important thing we can do is to learn from our choices and grow stronger. Share this video, subscribe, and stick around for more stories that reveal the lessons life teaches us when we least expect them. In the end, what I learned is this: trust is the foundation of any relationship. Once it's broken, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. We all face moments of doubt and temptation, but integrity, choosing honesty even when it's hard, makes us stronger. That's a lesson for everyone, whether you're a neighbor, a coworker, or a friend. In a world that often prioritizes quick gratification, choosing truth over deceit, it isn't just about personal relationships. It's about the kind of society we want to live in. America thrives when we value honesty and accountability. That's the standard we should all strive for.